marketing really is more of a farming venture. The fruits of our labor, pay off. And, what I'll say is that my experience with marketing is it's not like hunting or fishing. If you go hunting, you go and kill an animal and you drag it back, or you go fishing and you cast a line and reel it in. And, you really just have to plant those seeds and work that garden for it to be able to harvest it. And that's just been really my experience and kind of the learning curve of going from an established business to a startup, is that I have learned that there's no substitute for time.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Pursuit of Purpose. My name is Chris Kiefer, and today I am with Brian Brock from Orange Rhino Concrete Coatings. Brian, thanks so much for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
For those that are not in the concrete space or don't know you, why don't you just give us a quick 60-second elevator pitch of who Orange Rhino is and what you guys do and where you do it.
So we are located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we cover a few markets in the Southeast, including Huntsville and Birmingham, Alabama. We are in the concrete coatings business. So what we do is we go to a concrete space, typically a garage, and we make the concrete floor look outstanding by adding some color and texture to it. And we founded our company last year. So we are, I guess it's cool to say we're a startup. And so we're new to the space and really enjoying it so far.
And one of the things that I think is, or at least from the time that I've known you, obviously we got to know each other through the Pentech network, and I have the shop that is right adjacent to my office has a Pentech floor in it. And yeah, I feel like Pentech, just concrete coatings in general, I would always tell people at like trade shows, it's kind of like air conditioning. Do you need air conditioning? People live hundreds of thousands of years without it, but once you have air conditioning, you're like, I kind of like some air conditioning in my house. And I feel like a floor is that same thing. If you've lived many years without a concrete coated garage floor or patio or whatever, but once you have it, you're kind of like, this is pretty nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to reward yourself with something nice from time to time, and that's what we're in the business of doing.
Yeah. And so your background was, this isn't the first venture that you've gone into. You had a lot of experience in managing, growing. What was the other company? I'm spacing. It wasn't home service.
So I started, my first job out of college was I sold radio advertising. So I have kind of a passion for marketing and a little bit of a geek when it comes to traditional media, actually, copywriting and using radio and television to advertise. And so I did that for about 8 years, and then joined a company called Holco that operated for nearly over 40 years in Southeast Tennessee. And I joined them in 2008 along with a friend who had bought the company from his father, and he and I worked together and grew the company from $4.5 million to $25 million a year in annual revenue. And
That's
so
awesome.
that was a fun ride. And so we got to learn a lot about marketing and in-home sales and improving people's home. And we were in that space during a lot of transition, from when the internet really started becoming a resource for homeowners, and when the in-home sales tactics really changed. That was something that we saw really kind of emerge as we were in the midst of that space. And then obviously how the dynamics of advertising and marketing have changed. We were kind of in the thick of all of that. So it was fun to be part of an organization that went for so long. We were able to go through a couple phases of kind of how things work in marketing.
What was the, so being in radio, coming up in that, can you give me like a specific, and maybe I would even say within the last like 3 years or 5 years, I'm assuming that as you were prepping and then now running Orange Rhino, you were drawing on experiences of, hey, this is kind of like when we transferred from X to Z in this case, and we're realizing that you're having to pivot your marketing plan and strategy with Orange Rhino. What are some like parallels in those two spaces?
Well, I tell you, I kind of took for granted that the parallels would be very parallel. So
Ah,
I kind of took a game plan that I used at an existing successful branded company that had equity in the space that it was in. And it was exterior remodeling, so windows, doors, siding, roofing, that kind of thing. So I tried to take that marketing plan and apply it to this concrete coatings business. And it didn't work out like I'd hoped, honestly. So we tried some other things, but what I've kind of realized being right at 12 months in is that maybe the initial game plan wasn't the problem. The problem was is that it just takes a lot of time to gain traction and build equity in the consumer mind. And we also launched this product in a market that was highly competitive. I have three pretty stable competitors in the market. They don't offer the same product I do, but they offer a similar product. And so we entered a competitive, crowded space in a relatively small market and had no, we came out of the ground. We were brand new, so it took a little while to gain that equity. But now we're starting to see, the fruits of our labor, pay off. And what I'll say is that my experience with marketing is it's not like hunting or fishing. If you go hunting, you go and kill an animal and you drag it back, or you go fishing and you cast a line and reel it in. Marketing really is more of a farming venture, and you really just have to plant those seeds and work that garden to for it to be able to harvest it. And that's just been really my experience and kind of the learning curve of going from an established business to a startup is that I have learned that there's no substitute for time.
mm. Yeah, I was going to say that that's reminding me that when I or in my previous job, we were in working in Pentech and trying to start new markets. Uh, I think, and this is also conversations I've had with other Pentech dealers. And I think this is analogous to any home service, but I completely agree with you. And I'm making these numbers are not exact; these are just from like loose memory, and I can't remember which service types these applied to, but let's say in the painting world, an established painting company that's been in a given city for 15, 20 years, their marketing spend to revenue was sub, 5%, might even have been sub 4% for this, good sized company. And then you tack on concrete coatings, and the marketing spend for that particular product, say, was maybe 9% or something, but still manageable. And then we would go to a brand new market that had no history of ever doing, like, we had never they didn't have any context of the brand in that new market. And we're thinking like, okay, 15%, 20%, whatever. And it was like many like months and quarters of 25%, spend. And we're just like, what is going wrong? Like, we duplicated the exact same campaign strategies, everything, and it just wasn't working. Like, we were completely stumped. And I think like now I definitely agree with you, and I'm wondering what else you like. I do think there are ways to maybe speed it up a little bit and be like intentional. Like, you can't just do anything. Like, certainly there are some strategies that are going to be more effective at like branding or getting your name in the mind of the consumer. But yeah, I do think that if you're going to go into a market that has no context of who you are, uh, what is the time frame that you should kind of just buckle up and say, we're in this for X amount of time, and we're just going to keep our head down and grind and spend money? And how long does that take, even with good strategy?
I think it's variable. I think it depends on what you offer and how prime the market is for what you have to offer. I mean, if you opened up a water stand in the middle of the desert, you would have immediate results despite how bad your marketing efforts were. So, I think, you know, you hear all the the success stories. The people, well, we started the business and within 6 months we took off, and within a year we were running 5 crews. Like, those are the anomalies. That's like Nutrisystem getting on and saying, well, I lost 450 pounds. Well, they picked the one guy that did it, to tell this story. And the reality is, you got all these other people like just trudging it out, playing the long game. And I just firmly believe that there's not a substitute for time, but I also believe there's not a substitute for good fundamentals and executing good strategy. And so, you know, good strategy is just something that has to be applied to any brand and any startup. And, I'm a believer that you've got to expose a problem, present a solution, your advantages, and give them a reason to call and to call now. And if you can communicate that clearly through the marketing channels, and I'm almost kind of thinking that it's not even as important which marketing channel you use so much as whatever marketing venue you choose, you do it right and you do it with some consistency and some frequency to where you can catch attention. So whether that's, mailers and print, or whether that's a billboard campaign, or whether that's radio or television, or whether that's Facebook, it's a matter of just really, putting your eggs in that basket and being consistent with it.
Yeah. What is the amount of, like, because I would say there's no substitute for time, but would you agree that certainly money helps speed up the process a little bit? Like, if you're going to drop, 200 grand a month, just to be crazy, you're going to be able to get a lot more saturation in the market sooner than if you're spending 2 grand a month, right? But so then there's the question of, I guess, I don't know how, if you were advising someone that was starting a new product, how would you kind of decide what a prudent amount of money is to spend before you're seeing results and income from that? Or how do you ramp up? How did you guys, maybe you don't know generally, but would you have done anything different from that perspective?
Yeah. So in our ramp up, we started, pretty well capitalized. And I think that if I could caution anyone, it would be not to hire too many people too soon, and not, we took kind of a if we build it, they will come strategy. So we were ramped up with a couple of rigs, a bunch of tools and equipment, a bunch of people, and then we started in the fall and went straight into the holiday season at a time where there was economic environment that really became less favorable. So what happened was we hemorrhaged a lot of money on the front end, and we hadn't really done enough sales to support it. So, my advice would be capitalize slowly. Even if you've got the money to do it, just kind of hang on to it, and maybe pre-sale. Maybe get a little bit of a backlog going before you really start spending money you don't have yet. The other thing I would say too, from a marketing standpoint, is just to be very intentional and, really dive into, who you want to market to demographically and where they're at. And as far as coming up with what that budget amount is, I think that's very formulaic. You come up with what your projected or desired revenue target is. You divide that by what you know from industry peers is the average sell amount. That tells you how many jobs you need to sell. So then it's reverse engineering to where how many leads do you need to get to sell that many jobs at that average sale to get that revenue target. And you figure out based on an average lead cost, what that looks like. So if your target revenue is $100,000, let's say, and you know that your average sale is $10,000, well, you need to sell 10 jobs, right? So you probably have to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 leads, depending on how well you get them converted to appointments and sold and all of that. But that gives you an idea. So then it's like, well, what marketing is it going to take to generate those 50 leads to generate $100,000 in revenue? And that is how we approached our marketing.
Would you say that in that, using that math there, so 100,000, 10,000 average job size, that's 10 jobs, 30 to 50 leads. Would you say to start from a work backwards of we're willing to spend 20% of revenue. So we're going to spend 20 grand and then we're going to go 20 grand divided by 50. And that's the amount that we're willing to spend to acquire a lead. And then because I'm just thinking that at that point you have at least a cap or like a high number of what things could we do today that could get us a lead for $300 or $200 or whatever the number is to then go work on your strategy. Because I think like TV, for example, I'm curious. Actually, I would be curious. You come from a radio background. What of those traditional TV broadcast billboards are you using all of those or some of them working better than others?
Well, I'll tell you, I got lucky. So my billboards, I'm not paying retail for those. The local billboard company that has most of the real estate in our market approached us about doing a trade. So they had an 8,000 square foot space that they needed coating. So I was able to trade at my full
Negotiate, yeah.
retail for that. Yeah. So, um, and that was good. And as a startup that, was still in the midst of trying to sell jobs, to be able to go park my guys for 3 straight weeks, on a given job, when it was cold outside, that was a good thing. So I got lucky from a timing standpoint, and I was just very fortunate to have a good partner with this outdoor company. So that enabled me to get billboards at, essentially a pretty steep discount. Without revealing profit margin, you could figure I'm getting that substantially cheaper than I could have had I paid retail. So we have those, and that's been helpful. And again, it's taken some time for people to start acknowledging and recognizing and saying, "Hey, I've seen your billboards." And again, I think it underscores all the other efforts we make. We do local broadcast television. I don't do a lot of cable because it's so fragmented. Um, but our demographic is typically a little bit older people with some disposable income, and a lot of those baby boomers are still consuming local news and local television. So we reach them there, and then we're pretty selective, but we do some radio as well. And again, I look at that as a way to reach consumers outside the home, in addition to the TV, supported by the billboards. So it all kind of works together.
What would you, and you can take a second to think about this, but if you were to go back on the year and a half that you've been in this, uh, what were like the three cautionary, like, don't do X, Y, Z, or what would you change? Maybe another way to say that. Like if you were to talk to Brian Brock a year and a half ago and give him all the wisdom you have now, what would be those top three things to do differently or not do?
So the first thing is I probably would have hired fewer people out of the gate. Um, we did. Now, I didn't approach this as the entrepreneur that's going to install the jobs during the day and go sell the jobs at night. We were capitalized and had the luxury of being able to hire support personnel and installers. But I would have hired fewer people at the beginning. So that would have been number one. Caution number two, as far as material, tools, and equipment, I might have been a little more cautious with that. Pentech gives you an outline for your initial stocking order, and I would do that. But I did. I got pretty. I felt a little confident when we had like our first pretty good month, and I ended up buying enough inventory to where I didn't have to pay shipping, but I way, way, way overbought. And so, granted, I worked my way through it, but when you're a startup, you just really have to hold on to cash. And so, I would be very diligent and deliberate about vehicles, material, tools, and rather than if I build it, they will come, I would probably just wait till I had the demand in place and then buy that stuff, which a lot of people already do. Like I just was in such a good situation, I took advantage of it and it didn't work out. So, I'll just chalk that up to what it was. And then finally, Facebook. And I know Meta is probably listening to this conversation somehow, and I hope they are. Uh, I spent, oh gosh, over the past 12 months, I probably spent over 50 grand on Facebook, and I've not gotten near the results that I should have gotten. And I think for a few reasons. Number one, you hear the complaints from people in the industry, just saying, hey, the algorithm's changed, the way you go about it's changed. So you had some of those challenges. You have the economic environment. But the other thing is I think one of the reasons that the algorithm is how it is and the cost per click and all that have gone up is it's so competitive. In other words, everybody tried to rush to that same venue at the same time. So like all of my competitors are there. And what I think happened was is we
Just
got diluted.
outbid up the price of everything.
Yeah, well, we got diluted, is what happened, and we paid more for it. And so, really, you go into some other areas where your competitors aren't. Well, in my case, billboards are an area where my competitors aren't. TV is an area where my competitors are not. And now we're really just going hyper local with proximity campaigns, kind of going back to old school direct mail because reality is no matter what the digital climate is and all the cool whiz bang that's available, people still stop on the way in their driveway at that mailbox, and it's been really helpful, especially when you're targeted to a neighborhood with the type of homes who want this kind of product. And so we've really found some success there. So going back to your original question, number one, I would hire a few people to start with, wait and see what you need. I would buy less stuff, wait and see what you need, and I would probably just steer away from Facebook, or I would do it in little bits at a time.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing is uh, like don't go into something blindly. Don't go into a marketing channel blindly, but take what I'm hearing, which I think is very wise, is look at all of the options you have in front of you. Which ones are oversaturated and undersaturated, and which ones can you get a deal? Like I think that maybe someone's not going to be able to get a billboard deal trade like you did, but is there a magazine that like those little um, shopper mags that go around with coupons and stuff like that? Like I know I love finding opportunities to trade for things like that, and I think you have to be strategic in those early days to come up with little wins like that.
Yeah, and events where you can get face to face with someone. I mean, our home show, we gave away a free garage floor coating. That got us a ton of names of people that have the space to be coated and have some interest in it. And we drew a winner, and we went and did the floor, and we posted it on social media. And granted, we didn't pay to boost that, but we posted it, and we called all those people, and we generated appointments and sold jobs off of it. So that was good. Another thing too is hustle. And one of the things we do is if we're in a desirable neighborhood, we'll take a gift to the homeowner while the project's going on and maybe knock a few doors. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating, and I'm not discouraging either. It's just not our style, like a full-on canvassing program. So I'm not talking about putting on the yellow vest and having this, script and carrying the clipboards and all of that. Now, there's people that do that and do a great job with it, and that's fine. But what I'm talking about is literally going to the neighbor and being very transparent and saying, hi neighbor, my name's Brian. I'm with Orange Rhino Concrete Coatings. We are working down the street at Chris's house. And you know what? We love this neighborhood and we'd like to sell more jobs here. And if you're interested in getting garage floor done, we'd love to come give you a quote. And here's a coupon. And you hand them a giant door hanger that looks like a giant $250 bill. And if you can do that a few times, like I'm not talking 100, I'm talking 5 or 10 right around your job, and you can generate a couple of appointments off of that and then sell a job, like that's well worth a few minutes of just a little bit of hustle.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. Uh, there are certain strategies that are only like so marketing. I love the farming analogy. That's like timing matters. The types of seeds that you're planting matter. Where you're at geographically, you can't grow the same thing that someone else is growing in a different geographic area, And there is so much nuance to it. But I do think, especially for startups in particular, there's just a like, sometimes it's like, hey, let's get out there, knock on doors, and see like who can close one in the next 20 minutes or get one scheduled. Like I think that is absolutely a must for a startup. Um, so yeah, what else in the this marketing space? I kind of like sitting in this theme for the remainder of our time. What else, like how has the trying to think of what direction you want to take this, like metrics that are useful to track, or I think feel like that might be overdone and obvious, but if you've got some that will like break through, like, hey, this is a really key one, I'm interested in that. Also curious, like from a brand perspective, you came from Holco and they had, that brand was so strong and trusted, and there's all this like just assumptions that homeowners are making that you probably didn't even or weren't aware of. And then Orange Rhino comes along and you've got quite a big gap to get people to feel the same thing that they felt when they purchased something from Holco, right?
So metrics obviously are important. And I'll tell you, there's some guys that I've met, and you're one of them, that are like super, super steeped in the data, like know every little detail. And I'm not opposed to that, but I tend to measure it from a very simple basis. I look at number of leads in, how many of those converted to an appointment, how many appointments got demoed, and then ultimately what got sold. And there's one metric that ties all of that together, and it's NSLI, net sales per lead issued. And, um, having a target for NSLI and meeting that target really is a very, very quick way to get a snapshot of where you sit. It's probably my favorite. It's kind of like just looking up at a scoreboard and going, "What's the score?" You know, so that's probably my favorite metric because it does tie it all together. Um, I do have a fundamental philosophy that all marketing works together. So while I have a lead or a series of leads that are getting credit as an internet search, I also realize that my TV ads may have prompted them to make that search. Um, likewise, if I have somebody respond to a piece of mail or a coupon magazine or something, I realize that maybe they heard a radio ad on the way home. So, I think that it's a matter of understanding the big picture, but using these data points just to help guide the decision. For example, I was able to do a data analysis on our first 10 months in business. And what I found was is I had a number of TV leads and I had a number of Facebook leads. I spent more money on Facebook than I did television, but I had actually more jobs sold out of the TV lead bucket than I did out of the Facebook bucket. So I had more leads, but I had fewer sales. So the NSLI for my Facebook leads was significantly lower than my NSLI of TV leads. And one of the things I learned very quickly with these proximity campaigns with direct mail and door hangers was that my NSLI went through the roof with those. So it was a lot smaller number of leads, significantly
High quality.
smaller, well, but a significantly smaller amount of money spent, but they closed at 45% and the average tickets were higher. So the NSLI delivery on those was so much higher, I couldn't ignore it. So what I did is I made the decision to pull Facebook back drastically and just take that money and funnel it into the proximity space.
Yeah. I think that I love that you went to that metric. I literally had a conversation this morning with a client of mine about, I call it VPS, value per sales qualified lead. Same exact metric. But for those of you that are in a business that requires leads for, the service that you're selling, I think that I'm just doing some quick math on my phone to try and get some numbers here. I think the most underrated use of that NSLI is once you know that your NSLI is 2,500, let's say, now from like one of the hardest things from a marketing team, like your marketing manager, or if you're doing the marketing, it's really hard to know when you have enough. When did marketing do their job, and when did they provide enough leads to the sales team? Because when I first started in my marketing director role, I was like, there was just pressure of like, we need more leads. It's like, well, what's the goal? Like, I don't know. We just need a lot. Like, okay, well, let's just throw a number and the goal's 50. It's like, well, why is the goal 50? I don't know. Cause we got 40 last month. See if we can get 50 this month. It's just like very, like sporadic and stressful because there's not a benchmark of like, if you hit this number, marketing team, I'm talking to you, if you hit this number, then sales will do their job and production will do their job and we'll hit revenue. But in order to do that, you need the NSLI because it gives, like, if your NSLI is 2,500, you can say our revenue for January, our goal is $100,000 and our NSLI is 2,500. So we need 40 leads because 100,000 divided by 2,500 is 40. And our lead cost is $200 a lead. So our marketing budget is $8,000. And now it's like, go get us 40 leads marketing and you've got $8,000 to do it. Like that simplicity of cookbooking your year is like I would say, for my opinion, would be any business that's starting out, it's go find out what your NSLI is as fast as you can, or ask around if you want to start with something, and then fine tune that number to your market and your sales team as you guys are getting better and adjust. But yeah, it's like, it's so powerful and it just makes everything so much more simple.
Yeah, our NSLI went up 25% in the past 6 months, and and again, asking around can work, but here's where you got to be careful.
How are they
So,
tracking and their metrics and all that stuff?
well, not only that, but like we're in the concrete coating space, and we do a lot of garages and we do porches, but we do not do pool decks. Well, my friends in Florida do a lot of pool decks. So if I ask one of these Florida dealers, what should my average sale be? They're going to spit out a number of around $8,000, and they're going to have an NSLI. Literally, they're going to have an
4 grand.
NSLI of $2,700 or
Oh
something like
yeah.
that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, like they're going to be in that space. Well, my NSLI is 2 grand because my average sales like 4,300 bucks because most everything I'm doing are garages. So it's it, it's relative to what your goals are and what you're wanting to do, and just having the common sense to apply that filter to what you learn when you ask around.
Yeah. I love that. So the NSLI. So the other question I was going to ask, or I don't know if you have anything else on metrics, and then we can go to that brand question.
So you're right. So working for Holco, when I joined Holco, it was a 30-year-old company. My business partner Matt Hollander, his dad founded Holco in 1977, and in 2007 he bought the company from his dad. Matt did, and then he hired me in 2008, right at the beginning of the year. So I joined a 30-year-old company. And so there was already equity, there was already a big group of customers. But what we did is we took a company that hadn't advertised and hadn't really they didn't have a brand. What they had is they had a business that was built on hard work and hustle by an entrepreneur, and that was a family business that grew by word of mouth and a little bit of newspaper ads twice a year, but it grew over 3 decades. And what we did is we took that fuel and we lit it. And so what Matt did is he bought the company from his dad. Is he said, you know what, we're stable, we've been around a long time, we've got a great reputation. Now it's time to double down. And he gave me an ad budget, and he goes, I want you to take this amount of money. And I remember our first revenue goal was to do $400,000 in 1 month. Like that was our first target to hit. I started in February of 2008, and the goal was within 1 calendar year, we wanted to be able to hit $400,000. Well, we hit it by that summer, and then the target was $500,000 in revenue. So grow it. And I remember we did a sales contest for our sales team called the October 500. And in 2008, we did the October 500. We basically gave out bonuses and had a big party and all that for everyone in the company if we could hit 500,000 in revenue in October of 2008, and we did it. And from there, it just really took off. And so we year over year just continued to raise that ad budget because we got really lucky in that what we started doing worked pretty quickly. Like we started with television and radio, we grew it, we grew it, we grew it, and incrementally, that ad budget, I'll tell you, over the course of the 11 years I was there, our advertising budget went from $100,000 to $1.3 million.
Wow. For the year or?
Yes, for the year.
Yeah, yeah.
Now
That's
that
crazy.
that did include an expansion into another market in East Tennessee, so keep that in mind. But my point is our marketing budget, went up more than 10x because we just grew it every year. But likewise, our revenue went from $4.5 million to like 20 something million in that same time span. So we kept the percentages the same, but as the revenue target grew, we would look at the next year, forecast where we wanted it to be. We'd reverse engineer the budget and go, okay, this is the marketing budget. We knew what our NSLI was. It was, 7 grand or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, we know what that is. So now we know how many leads we need. This is what the budget we've got to work with. So going back to your metrics question, it fueled that. So, um, all that to say, it's kind of like if you were my wife and I's guilty pleasure is to watch Naked and Afraid. So you see these people like stripped off naked in the wilderness. And, when they have a fire starter, it's much easier to start the fire than when they don't. So I would say my time at Holco was like these naked people in the woods with a fire starter. It's still a challenge. Like you still had to get interest and all that, but we had a fire starter. So we were able to light the fire. Doing a startup is like no fire starter and wet food. It's like, oh, where's this going to come from? So
Yes.
it's not that it can't be done. It's just it's a much harder work, and I think between hustle, tenacity, desire, a little bit of common sense, and a little bit of luck, it kind of takes all of those things for it to work and take off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so last couple questions I have for you here. 3 book recommendations.
I could give you 100. No, not really 100, but I could give you a bunch. But
Give me the best 3.
well, I'm going to give you 3. 2 of them are very similar. One of them is way different. So the first one I'm going to recommend is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Jocko Willink was a Navy SEAL commander. Extreme Ownership is a business book. So what Jocko does in this book is he gives you kind of a law or rule of extreme ownership, taking personal responsibility. He explains how that served his task unit in combat. Then he takes that principle and applies it to a business situation. So it's an entertaining read. So if you like action and combat and all that, it's really cool because he takes these principles, applies it to combat, applies it to business, and draws that parallel for you. So it's all about taking personal responsibility and not blaming others, which as a leader I think is a super big deal. The second book I'm going to recommend is called The Noticer by Andy Andrews. And it is, I think if I could use one word to describe this book, it would be perspective. And I don't want to say too much about the book because you really just need to dive into it. But I think that most humans, if you listen to or read The Noticer, I think you will walk away with more kindness in your heart. And I think it's just a great story. A friend recommended it, and I absolutely loved it. And then my third, and I've got several. Like one of my favorite books is a book called Fearless, but I'm not going to recommend that here. Sea Stories by William McRaven. So
the letter C?
Huh?
The letter C or SEA?
SEA, Sea Stories, another Navy SEAL. So Admiral William McRaven was the admiral in charge, or he was the commander of special operations while the war on terrorism was going on, and he led an operation called Neptune Spear that killed Osama bin Laden. And he wrote a book. He's written 3 books, one called Make Your Bed, one called Hero Code, one called Sea Stories, and actually a 4th one called Wisdom from the Bullfrog. They're all great books, but he made the famous Make Your Bed and Change the World speech at University of Texas a few years ago. So Admiral McRaven's Sea Stories, I recommend all of his books, but Sea Stories would be the one. If I've just got to give you 3, I'm going to say Extreme Ownership, The Noticer, and Sea Stories.
I'm excited. I think I'm going to jump into Sea Stories. I've read the Extreme Ownership, but the Sea Story, I remember that guy that you want to change the world, go home, make your bed. That's the speech, right?
Hey, by winning something, it sets the stage for the day. It's
100% agree.
My
yeah.
mindset.
Awesome. And then the last one here is movie. What is your favorite movie or a recommendation for a movie?
I don't know about a recommendation. Man, I have a goofy sense of humor. So the Austin Powers series is probably like just one of my all-time favorites. I mean, Dr. Evil is like the greatest villain of all time to me. And I love stupid humor, like just mindless entertainment. So, gosh, I really like Austin Powers. Anything that's goofy and funny, I just really, really like. As far as an action movie,
which Austin Powers movie which one's the best one? The original or?
Oh, either the first one or I like Goldmember.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always interesting there's so many movies out there, and the movies that people recommend, I'm always like, oh, I totally forgot about that. Like this one, it's a comedy, which it has a 7 out of 10 on IMDb for a comedy, which is crazy because comedies are usually right in the 5s because some people think it's hilarious and other people think it's
they're polarizing,
Yeah, but a 7 out of 10 is really good for a comedy movie. That's awesome.
What's your favorite?
I like to make recommendations of like a movie that is like not super well known, but still like has a good rating, and it's Law Abiding Citizen with Gerard Butler.
Yeah.
Have you seen that one?
I sure have.
Those types of movies I just think they're spectacular. And actually, I just how long ago was this? 2 months ago, maybe. My wife and I were watching Heist. Have you seen that on Netflix? It's a show. It's a series. But if you like Gerard Butler or Ocean's 11, movies like that, I just like the mastermind that spent his entire life, fabricating, coming up with this plan, and then it's executed. And the whole time you're like, oh, like I know what's going to happen here. And you're like, nope, you're wrong. Like he thought about that and like, oh, they're going to get caught. Nope. He had this plan figured out, whatever. And it's just like those types of movies. And the Law Abiding Citizen is another one of those that's just like, it's a little graphic. Certain parts are graphic, but I think that it's the brilliance of like a deranged psychopath is interesting to observe.
That was a good movie. Have you seen Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Yes, I would say that's another one that's right in there with like that style of movie is fantastic. I love those.
I like those too, but I always default to the comedies for some reason.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have, you got to have the something to just, decompress at the end of the day, and laughter is good for the soul. So, well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. This was good. Got some great conversation around marketing and starting up a business. Glad to hear things are on the up and up over at Orange Rhino. And we'll be seeing you around.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for your attention and listening to this episode of The Pursuit of Purpose. Your feedback and comments mean the world to me. If you liked what you heard, please take a second, leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. If you've got suggestions for future episodes or just want to say hi, shoot me an email at chris@chriskiefer.com. Don't forget, I make it a point to include all the links to the books, movies, and resources mentioned on this episode in the show notes. You can see those directly below in the description or on my website, chriskiefer.com. Thanks so much, guys.